Hello, and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking. In preparation for today's conversation, I was doing some research and I came across some information very relevant to today's topic. As you may know, the World Economic Forum recently identified the 10 fastest growing workplace skills needed by 2030. And what the research reinforced for me is that while technology skills such as AI, cybersecurity, and technical literacy are definitely accelerating, human skills remain an essential competitive advantage. Skills such as social influence, leadership, creative thinking, resilience, and analytical thinking ranked among the fastest growing skills employers are seeking over the next 5 years. And all of those human skills depend on an essential capability, our ability to effectively communicate in a way that influences others. You can have the brightest idea in the room, the most insightful analysis, the best innovative solution. But if you're unable to garner trust, shape thinking, and inspire others to act, that value has limited reach. So that's exactly what we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be unpacking how you go about effectively communicating in ways that genuinely influence others. And we have a very special guest joining us today for this conversation, Libby Magliolo. Libby, I'm so delighted to have you with us today at Power Speaking Live.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me, Carrie.
Oh, you bet. So let's talk a little bit about your credentials, Libby. Libby has extensive experience in strategic planning and executive storytelling gained through her roles at PwC and Southwest Airlines. Now a professor at Southern Methodist University, Libby also runs the Slide Master, a business dedicated to helping professionals craft and deliver impactful presentations, which no doubt requires one's ability to effectively influence.
It does in a very big way. And I think for a lot of my career, I would have thought, well, I'm not in sales, so I don't need to influence, but we all need to influence. Every single conversation, there's something that we're trying to influence if we're going in for a job interview or we're asking for a raise or we're trying to get our boss to get on board with a certain way of thinking. We're always trying to influence. So it's something that is not just for those in sales or for someone selling a proposition. It's for all of us because we all have to influence in almost every conversation that we have in the workplace setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to differentiate between persuasion versus influence
Mm.
because this isn't about trying to manipulate someone.
Right.
Persuasion is very specific to trying to change people's mind. Influence, on the other hand, is much broader. Influence is about helping to shape how people think, feel, and act for the benefit of that individual, the organization, the client, whatever is relevant to the context of that situation.
Absolutely. And I think that when we think about influencing with our work and being the own PR person for our communication, we do think, okay, well, I've got to be arrogant, I've got to be manipulative, I've got to shape this to my own agenda and everything. When in reality, like all communication, it's about creating clear, concise communication that is audience specific. And so walking into a room where we know our audience and we know who they are and what they want and what they're preoccupied by and the KPIs that are important to them. And knowing that, that's a form of influencing because we need to know our audience. We need to know how to shape our communication to that audience. If we're walking into the CFO's office, The CFO has certain things on their mind, and we shape and mold our communication to the things that are on their mind. That's executive presence, that's influence. We're not trying to manipulate anything, but we are trying to create audience specific communication because that does influence. So it is on us to understand that audience and walk in understanding how this narrative affects the person that we are giving it to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to acknowledge our audience. I really encourage you to join into the conversation. If at any point you have a question or your own insight that you'd like to share, please drop that in chat. So, Libby, you already touched on some of these things, but let's get a little bit more specific. When you think about in your work, an individual who's really effective at influencing others, not because of their title, but because of how they communicate, what specifically are they doing?
Yes.
What are
So
some
this is a
things that really stand out?
Yeah, this is a really boring answer, and I think everyone wants to hear, well, it's the people who have the really crisp white shirts, or it's the people who do this. One of the things that is the most influential is just knowing your material better than anyone in the room. It's a boring answer because there's no shortcut to it. I had a mentor and seeing the amount of preparation that he put into going into the executive offices was phenomenal. We would help prepare the presentation, and then he always had what was called his back pocket list. And we hated putting the back pocket list together. But he wanted to have every data point in his back pocket, and he wanted to be able to answer every single question that came up because he didn't want to have to give the answer of, you know what, I'm not sure. Let me get back to you. He walked in prepared to paint a picture, to give a narrative, and prepared to answer any question or objection that may come up. To me, that's what influence is walking in being the subject matter expert and having done the preparation for anything that may come up. That's influence. And so that's not something that we can get to easily. It's not a shortcut of do these preparation exercises and say these tongue twisters and you're good, but you have to know your business better than anyone because you need to create trust with an executive audience and they need to have a feeling of, okay, this person has done their due diligence. They are the subject matter expert. I feel okay. I feel safe knowing that they care about this more than anyone else does. So that to me is table stakes. There's more that builds influence and trust. But to me, that's first. You have to walk in knowing your business better than anyone else in the room.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of an executive I talked to once said it's about prepare, 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 and then be able to go with the flow.
Yes.
So part of it, yes, is absolutely that preparation and being able to hold your own during the moment in those high stake conversations. Just quickly for our audience, a few years ago, we did some extensive research and produced a report called Influence Amplified and identified the pillars most essential to effectively influencing, especially senior leaders, executives, uh, senior clients, and preparation is paramount, as you say, Libby. And we just dropped that in chat for your reference. Another one that surfaced essential that goes hand in hand with preparation is, to your point, that audience centricity, making sure that how you communicate, the language you use, the way in which you're connecting with your audience is always focused on the audience and what the audience needs versus what you need.
Yes. And it's such, again, it's such boring advice of know your audience. It's public speaking advice 101 of know your audience. But what's helpful to me is the reframe of think about the last meeting that you were in or the last big presentation that you were in. Think about the speaker. Don't you hope and wish that that speaker did some level of preparation to understand who you are and what you want? I mean, if you're in a room full of marketers and your speaker comes in and they're an engineer and they use engineering speak and engineering jargon and they act like we all have a common language. Well, there's a big mismatch and we think didn't they do any due diligence to understand who we are and the language that we speak? So we always hope that our speaker has prepared and has shown respect for the audience and the audience's time in a way that they understand who we are. And so we owe it to our audience, especially once you get into bigger and bigger and bigger and more important rooms We need to be thinking really hard about who is this executive? What are the projects on their plate? How does what I'm saying fit into the broader landscape of things that they're working on? Because that's what's expected is to tailor to the audience. And we're going to have more successful presentations and communications that way. If we want to influence, then tailoring it specifically to that audience is so essential. And it's what we hope that speakers do for us.
So, on that note, in terms of preparation, before you ever say a word, what questions should be you be asking yourself to increase the likelihood you'll influence someone?
Yes, it's such a big question. There's one big question that you need to answer, which is what does success look like for this conversation? Excuse me. So when I was at Southwest Airlines, before you even got on the executive calendar, you had to say if your topic was an inform, a discuss, or a decide, because you needed to give the executives that lens of, I'm keeping you up to date. I'm just informing you about how this project is going versus decide. We need a decision before we walk out of here. So, what does success look like for this presentation is an essential question to ask. When we don't ask that question, we're much more likely to put ourselves in a spot where we're just information dumping, where we're just giving tons and tons of data without any thought to, well, what do I actually want to get out of it? What do I want the audience to feel, do, think as a result of this communication? That's the most important question. The question I ask after that is summarize your presentation in one sentence for me. Tell me what's going on in one sentence. That forces us as speakers, presenters, communicators to be crystal clear on the story that we're trying to tell. If you tell me, well, I'm just giving a bunch of data on marketing campaigns last quarter, that's not a great answer. But if we say, we're seeing that we had a massive spike in click throughs from our web campaigns, and we're digging into why that is, that's a much better answer. We're going in with that lens of here's what the communication is about, here's what the story is going to be about. If we're not clear on our own story, then the audience has no chance of being clear on what our story is. So think about what success looks like for that presentation, and then think about how you would summarize it, because those two things are going to provide a lot of clarity for your communication.
Such great advice. And again, on the surface, it might sound pretty simple.
Right.
That takes work. That
It
takes
does.
work. I love how you said summarized in one sentence
Yes.
what this is about. What's the essence of this talk? What's your core message?
Right. And this comes from what's called the pyramid principle, which was a McKinsey communication framework. It's also called bottom line up front. Students I have had who have been in the military, they know bottom line up front, and some students at defense contractors, they will get up and say, "My bluff, my bottom line up front is XYZ." That's how they're trained to communicate. It's so important for us to lead with the answer. Audiences have short attention spans and they need context for what's coming next. So, if you're looking to transform the way you communicate and especially the way you influence, the biggest and best thing that you can do is learn to lead with the answer. Not only does it tell the audience what is coming, and not only does it force you to be clear on what you're about to say, it also makes you appear more confident and more prepared. So it's the biggest bang for your buck. It's not what we naturally do. We naturally dig into details and then we build up to the conclusion at the end. But there's no bigger, better change that you can make to your communication than learning to lead with the answer up front.
Absolutely, particularly with executive audiences.
Yes.
We refer to that as lead with your bottom line, then
Yes.
support it with the most essential necessary evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
No question.
Another great benefit to what you're talking about in terms of being crystal clear on the outcome that you're trying to achieve, it helps you to differentiate between nice to haves versus must haves.
Yes.
So for highly technical people or people with deep subject matter expertise, which is a great asset, it can be a handicap, though. It can be very, very challenging for those individuals to net out their message and not inundate their audience with details. So you need to always come back to, is this piece of information essential to achieving the desired outcome? If not, leave it out. Have it in your back pocket if needed.
Right. And that's hard. That's hard because what goes through our mind is I have so much important information to share. I have so much. And you know what? Everything is essential. Thanks for the input, but I can't really cut anything. What I tell folks is, unfortunately, just because we have a lot of vital information to share does not mean their audience has the attention span or the appetite to hear it all. Our audience gets to pick when they tune out. And so if we are on essential data point number 3 and we've got 20 more, we cannot tell or choose if our audience has already tuned out. And so we need to cut until it absolutely hurts. And like you said, that's why the clarifying mechanism of what does success look like? What do I want out of this presentation? What is the through line? Unless it directly serves that through line, take it out, put it in the appendix, be prepared to speak to it. Just know that attention spans are short. Executives are busy folks. We need to get to the answer very quickly, support it with only the most essential, and then leave everything else and be ready to speak to it in question and answer or later on.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, another key to effectively influencing is to have the ability to communicate in a very compelling, concise way. Because in this
Yes.
time in which we are inundated with information, as Axios says, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to punch through the noise. So if you want to be effective in doing that, you need to be clear, you need to be concise.
Yes, because when you think about going into the executive office, you are one piece of a very busy day of theirs, and they are in charge of such a broad scope of the business, and they are counting on you to go through all of that information and to curate based on that specific presentation. They are not saying to you, "Hey, I want you to go get as much data as you can possibly get and then come back and regurgitate it for me here." They're saying, I want you to go get all the data. I want you to analyze the data. And then I want you to bring me back a recommendation based on that data. Because anything else, and you're dumping your job onto them. You're saying, here's data. I didn't analyze it. I didn't figure out a recommendation, but you can do that. They have a very broad scope of things that they need to pay attention to. So they're counting on you to look at all that source information, make a decision based on that, and then communicate that decision. In the AI age, information has become very, very cheap. And so the ability to curate and tell a specific story is more important than ever. People do not want data dumped on them. They want the story and they want you to create that story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what would you say is the quickest way to lose the ability to influence trust?
Lack of preparation is a big one. If questions start coming up and I don't know, I'm not sure, let me get back to you on that is a sign that we're not prepared to have that conversation. There's also a lot of language that we can use that undermines our ability to influence. And that can be hedging language of, I'm not sure if this is right, or, you know, I don't really know, but I think it could be this, or maybe it's this, or you know what, this may not be a good idea, but maybe we can try this. What you're showing to your audience is, I don't even think this is a good idea. I'm not even sure of what's going on. So there's no reason that you need to be sure of what's going on. Eliminating that language is essential. Now, that doesn't mean communicating certainty about something if we're not certain. We can say, based on the information we have, this is our recommendation. We want to be attuned to these 3 things that could go wrong, but this is our best recommendation at this time. If you're not confident in your recommendation, there's no reason that your audience is going to be confident in your recommendation. So, lack of preparation can very quickly erode trust and influence. And hedging language, I think, maybe, possibly, I'm not really sure, that hedging language can erode confidence in us very quickly.
Hmm. Absolutely. I would say the other key is trust.
Yes.
If you don't earn trust, you're going to have a very difficult time influencing others. And there's a lot that goes into that. Some of the things that are most essential is your ability to convey competence, credibility. I think the other thing that's really critical is uh, the underlying motive. If
Mhm.
the audience or the individual detects that this is really about this individual trying to advance their personal agenda
Yes.
versus what is in the best interest of the client, the best interest of the team, the best interest of the organization. That's a really, really essential distinction.
Yeah, and people can sniff those things out from a
Mhm.
mile away. So it's important to know what the motives are and everything. It is very important. Another way that you can build trust, because trust is not just built in the room during the presentation. Back in my corporate days, if we had a really big presentation, we would have all the pre-meetings, and the pre-meetings became more important than the actual meetings because we would have meetings with the executives team and other people that had the executives ear. And that was for two reasons. One was to start planting seeds for the idea, and the other was to get a sense of, what do you think is going to come up? What do you think the objections are going to be? And can you help us build this plan together? And so, if we're bringing that collaborative energy into our recommendation, we're showing that not only am I putting the forethought and care into this to do this work beforehand, but I am trying to build a collaborative solution that includes other voices. And I learned that that's the way to influence. That's the way to get things done. It's hard to have a decision made in one 40-minute meeting. But if you have had multiple meetings before and you started to plant the seeds early, then hopefully by the time you get to that big meeting, then the decision is already made and you have planted enough seeds that that decision is a much easier, quicker one to make. So influence and trust is definitely built before the big meeting and not just in the big meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also really appreciate that you touched on just language choices, language that can undermine your credibility, undermine your ability to influence. You talked about avoiding hedging, avoiding
Yes.
qualifiers. Don't apologize. This might not be a good idea, but I'm just going to put it out there. To your point, you're already conveying doubt in your own ideas and
Right.
recommendations. It's going to be really difficult to influence the audience.
It
And
is.
subtle shifts in language, like shifting from saying "I think" to "the
Yes.
audience," or excuse me, "the data shows," or
Right.
"based on our observations."
Right. Right. It can create this huge shift. And the other thing that we never want to do is we never want to show weaknesses where the audience would never have known. What I've heard a lot is, I really wanted to do more analysis on this and I didn't have the time, so this is the best we can do. So already as an audience, I'm thinking, well, okay, this is not the best work that we're looking at, rather than here's the analysis we have. As far as next steps, we're going to continue to delve into XYZ. So that small shift is huge. So again, it's not about manipulating, but it's about showing that we stand behind our work and showing that we're confident of our own work and not undermining it on behalf of the audience before we even get a chance to say what it is.
Absolutely. Now, we already talked about communicating with executives, what distinguishes someone who simply shares information from someone who truly influences the conversation. And I would say a key that you really underscored is the importance of leading with that bottom line and
Yes.
coming with a concrete recommendation and very strong evidence to back it up. Any other things that you think are essential, especially when trying to influence executives?
That's a very big one. That's the that is the one I would say is the most impactful because, like I said, when we bring a lot of disconnected information to any audience and dump it on them without analysis, what we're saying is, I didn't do the analysis, but you can if you would like. So leading with the answer is so essential because it means that we have done the hard work to figure out what the answer is, and we have done the hard work to figure out what data supports that answer and what data belongs in the appendix. So that's the biggest one because it's such a clarifying mechanism for us that if we've done the hard work to figure out the recommendation, then we're probably doing the hard work to make sure that we only have data that supports that and nothing extraneous. We've done the hard work to figure out what is the unifying story here and is all the information I'm including supporting that unifying story and creating the clearest, most concise version of that. So without a close second, learning to lead with the answer is the biggest payoff for you as a speaker, but also your executives as an audience as well.
Absolutely. And I would say the other, and this kind of goes with the point I made earlier about prepare, 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 and then be able to go with the flow,
Yes.
is being able to really read the room and
Yes.
ingest and pivot depending on the verbal and nonverbal cues that you're getting, which takes a lot of EQ and it takes a lot of experience and practice. David Binder asks a really important question. What's the best way to manage slash navigate competing priorities within and among the audience?
Ooh, that's such a good question. And a lot of this comes down to the preparation because if you have just the finance organization in the room, then maybe the finance organization is pretty well aligned. But if we have finance and then marketing and then legal all in the room, part of this is preparation. Part of it is knowing what are those competing priorities before I even walk into the room. And again, like I said, our prep meetings, hopefully we have met with finance and legal and we've met with everyone and say, what is important? What is important coming out of this conversation? I think it also is a question of knowing your audience. I remember having to play this game a bit in my corporate days of do we defer to the highest ranking executive or do we defer to the executive who has a certain priority? And that's going to come up to you knowing your audience, understanding the organizational politics, and doing a lot of that work before the room because you don't want to have to juggle that in the room for the first time when you realize, oh no, this is important to legal and this is important to marketing, and these are completely diametrically opposed. You don't want to have to deal with those politics in the room in front of everybody. So you want to do all the preparation you need to and understand when you're walking into a tough room with competing priorities. And I would also be clear about acknowledging that up front. I understand that within this project, we have different priorities that are important to different people. Today, what we're going to acknowledge is what we want to do moving forward with this project and take care of all those priorities as best we can. Acknowledge it, don't hide from it, but do the prep work so you're not walking in blind. It's a great question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate, and this is part of that audience analysis, is really, really understanding who's the ultimate decision maker in this audience, and who are the individuals that are very influential in
Yes.
guiding the decision makers' thinking and ultimate decisions. And that's where it's so helpful to have a sponsor if you don't know that really, really well. Someone very senior within the organization who can kind of serve as your coach and provide a lot of the intel that you're going to need to achieve that. And then I would say, uh, we talked about leading with your bottom line and then having your evidence to support it. Throughout that narrative, you want to proactively incorporate objections that the different competing groups and priorities might have.
Yes, for sure. We want to show that collaborative input along the way, and when we get to legal's input, get to the slide. Okay, I know I talked with Cheryl from legal about how this is a concern. Let me talk you through our plan for this and how we're going to handle this moving forward. But a great, well-prepared presentation, like you said, should take those objections and risks into account in the body of the presentation. That's how we build trust. That's how we build that influence in our idea is by taking those things into account and not just waiting for Q&A at the end of, well, what are you going to do about XYZ, but showing that we've heard the voices, we've heard the concerns and the risks, and we're taking those into account in our communication.
Talk about listening and how that skill plays into all of this.
Yes, listening is a highly, highly underrated skill in the corporate world. And early in my corporate career, I would have thought that the quote unquote softer skills, which I hate that term, were something that were a weakness. And I would have thought, well, I need to know how to write SQL queries and I need to know how to build a financial spreadsheet and all those things. And things like humor or listening or being able to read a room, those are soft, those are nice to have skills. When in fact, listening, I think is the most powerful skill that you can have walking into an executive suite because so often we listen only enough to where we can formulate our response. And okay, I've tuned out. I know what I'm going to say. I know how I'm going to object to this. I'm done. When in reality, especially in a difficult room, listening is a superpower. And the line I love is, "What I'm hearing is," and then helping reflect back on the conversation. What I'm hearing is that we have concerns about the budget, but we also have concerns about timeline, and we're worried about how to reconcile those 2. Does that sound like an accurate reflection of what I'm hearing? It can go such a long way to getting people on the same page. So often we talk past each other, and it's, "I'm shouting about my agenda, and you're shouting about your agenda," and if someone in the room can decide, okay, I'm not going to engage in this fight, in this squabble. I'm going to try and reflect what's going on. That's a huge tool in consensus building and moving past a difficult conversation. You mentioned EQ as well. And a big part of listening is being able to read the room and body language. And there's sometimes a moment where you see people start to look down at their phone and you realize, okay, I either need to speed things up, bring them back in into the conversation. Being able to see what's going on and gauge interest and engagement is huge. But listening is so underutilized because so many folks walk into a room with their agenda and success is, well, I want to talk about my agenda. When in reality, we need to make a decision and we need to get everyone on board with a decision. So listening is a tool that can help us get to that the fastest.
Mhm, mhm, and that is, part of what is into building trust, is, genuinely conveying that you wanna know what people are thinking, what they're
Yes.
most concerned about, so
Yes.
we can together get to the best possible outcome.
Yes. No question. Absolutely.
Rachel asks a question, "Are there any imperatives unique to presenting to clients/potential clients?"
Yes, it's a great question. I would encourage you to think about the last sales pitch that you were on the receiving side of, and think about everything you hated of that sales pitch. I tell folks that they have all the answers they need to give a great presentation inside of them. They know what a good and a bad presentation is from being an audience member. So think about the last time that you were sold to, and it could have been that this firm sat down and they said, you know what? We were founded in 1971, and along the way, we have won these 46 awards. We are based in Des Moines. I don't care. I absolutely don't care. I have completely tuned out. So, all the same things that we've talked about apply. Think about your audience. If you're in a sales situation, you're there because you're trying to solve a client or potential client's problem. That is the focus of the story. They are the hero of the story. You, as the salesperson, are not the hero of the story. So it's even dialed up that not only do you need to understand your audience, but you need to understand the problems of your audience. You need to understand the solutions that they may have tried. You need to understand the frustrations that they have. You need to understand their budget constraints and all of that. That's influence in a sales situation is knowing that client or potential client better than anyone. They don't care about you. They care that you understand their problem and can solve their problem and that you have done the preparation to understand their problem walking in. They want you to focus on them as the client. So I would say everything we've talked about is so true. Preparation before that conversation, being incredibly attuned to them and their problems, and listening, like we just talked about. If you see folks start to wander off or you see eyes clearly glazed over, that's a sign that we need to dial back in. And I'm a big fan of just asking the question of, I want to dive into our product features, but I want to make sure that we're using the time effectively and you're getting what you need out of this. Is there something that's on your mind or something that we want to make sure that you talk about before we go into the product features? Just call it out and make sure that you are being successful. So it's a great question, but we need to be so attuned to our audience doing that preparation and make sure that our communication is delivering on what they're hoping for.
Yeah, yeah, very, very well said, and thank you, Rachel, for the question. We have another one from Jenny. Hello, Jenny, so nice to see you. What are the top mistakes you often see with virtual speakers who are delivering a presentation or a proposal to decision makers all physically in the same room? Oh my goodness. That is a tough dynamic and super common in today's environment. I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear you first, Libby.
Yeah. Oh, Carrie, I'm excited to hear your thoughts. This is a uniquely post-COVID problem because, 2019, we would have thought, well, you can't sell that way. That's not how things are done. And then here we are right now. Virtual presentations, much of the same etiquette, many of the same things apply. It is tough when you are virtual and your audience is physically there in the same room. A couple of things that I see virtually. People think that being virtual can be an asset because I have all my preparation, I have all my notes right here. And what that leads to is people being overly scripted in their virtual delivery because you can tell that the eyes are slightly down here and we're reading off our notes and it comes off as very robotic. So I encourage you not to do that. That is a core mistake. I also tell folks in a virtual presentation that you need to be all that much more prepared and direct and you may need to call people into the conversation in a different way. And so you can get 2 minutes in and you can say, Kevin, I know you were concerned about timeline. Did what I just covered answer that, or is there anything you'd like to dig into? When people hear their name, they snap to attention. And what you're saying to them is, if you have objections, if you have questions, this is the time for you to do that. So just know that you have to be hyper aware, because if you go on a long monologue, you have lost folks, especially because you may not be able to read their body language and things as well. So just know that going in, that you should be human and conversational, but you may have to draw folks into the conversation. Carrie, I'm curious about your thoughts. What do you think?
Like, way to demonstrate what you were just suggesting. I
Carrie, what do you
I
think?
w I would say I agree with you 100%. And it's so interesting. I want to go back to a point you made. One of our facilitators, Amy Ferber, was talking about the fact that uh, a lot of professionals are completely out of practice, hold their own and have a compelling delivery suddenly when they're back in an in-person environment because they have become so
Yes.
used to just reading
Yes,
right off their notes.
right.
Yeah, and it's like they're rusty, and you have to go through the practice and the ability to be able to do that effectively again. But coming back to you, Jenny, I would say the number one mistake is not planning ahead and having a support person in that room. I would say that's the number one mistake. And I realize in some cases, like if this is a prospect pitch, you might not have the ability to have one of your colleagues in that room, or there may be travel limitations, but minimally you've done work with that prospect and you have an advocate. I would talk to that person in advance and say, I know we will both want this to be successful. What would be really useful to me, because you're going to be in the room and you're going to be able to read body language that I won't necessarily see, is if you could regularly be communicating in a private chat any signals that you're seeing that should be brought to my attention. So I would say that's one of the most critical things, is having that person in the room that can kind of be your companion, your support person. And then I would say the other thing that you brought up, Libby, is being extra intentional about knowing what points in the conversation do I want to bring my audience in. So more than in in-person session, even more than you would do then, you want to incorporate those moments of engagement so you're staying as connected with that audience as you possibly can, and looking for opportunities for pattern disruption. Don't have your slide displayed the entire time. Have some data that you show that's essential to providing context, then take that slide down and be looking in the camera and engaging with your audience, I think are some critical things.
We got applause. That Jenny gave you a applause hand, so that, it was a great answer.
I think that was for both of us. Um, and if you can have a producer like we have today, who's an extraordinary support person. And thank you, audience. These are such good questions. And please, if you have your own insights and recommendations, we'd love for you to share them. What do highly influential communicators do when they encounter resistance or disagreement?
Yes. Such a good question, because it's something that comes up so frequently. I don't know that I've ever been to a meeting where they say, "Your recommendation is flawless. We have no questions. Amazing. Here's $2 million." That's the ideal. So I'm sounding like a broken record, but ideally we know what that resistance is before we walk into the big meeting. We know that, "Ooh, they're really concerned about budget," or they're concerned about competitor response, or whatever it is. We know that before we walk into the room. We don't wanna be experiencing that for the first time in front of everybody. If we are, and that certainly does happen, the best thing I can tell you is, as much as possible, try and remain neutral and not defensive. Often when we walk into a room, we hold this recommendation and this work very personally and very close to us. And when we get a comment of, "I just don't think this is going to work," or "This is too expensive," or whatever it is, that can feel very personal. It can feel like we're very personally attacked. Try and remain as neutral and non-defensive as possible. I'm a big fan of the phrase, tell me more. I don't think this is going to work. Tell me more. Well, I don't think it's going to work because of XYZ. Okay. Tell me more about this certain aspect. And so getting to the root of it rather than just getting our defenses up and say, well, of course it's going to work. And you don't understand the merit of this idea and all of that. I think it's also a helpful shift to see people who are commenting and saying, oh, this may not work and all of that. Seeing those people as an opportunity and also seeing that those people are engaging in your idea and take that as a win. I would rather have that than somebody who has been on their phone the entire time and who is completely disconnected from the conversation. So view that as input and view that as someone who is engaged in your idea and wants to help make that idea better. It's going to happen. It's going to happen in every conversation. Somebody is going to disagree with you on some aspect. It's going to happen. So prepare for it. Ideally, we can know going in and we can have a prepared response ready. I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to flip to the appendix and show you some data that has made me feel better about this. So ideally, we're going in knowing that, but if it happens in the room, we can remain neutral, try not to be defensive, say, tell me more, and try to get to the root of what they're thinking about.
Um, Wonderful, wonderful advice. And you were making me think of the uh, research report I referenced that we shared in chat, Influence Amplified. And we came about that through extensive interviews that I did with executives across the world. And I was actually surprised how frequently they brought up uh, s something that's going to undermine someone's a speaker's I'm not articulating, I'm sorry. They talked about speakers getting defensive more than I expected they would,
Interesting.
and I don't know if that's because it's surfacing more than in previous generations, but, uh so essential to really get some coaching and some practice in making sure, to your point, that you remain neutral and don't get unintentionally triggered or charged.
That's so interesting. I'm surprised by that. What I have told folks is try and be as unemotional about bad feedback as you are about good feedback. Take it as data. If someone says, "Carrie, you did a really nice job of XYZ," don't hear that as I'm a phenomenal person. I'm perfect at everything. Hear that as, okay, I need to do more of XYZ. And if they say, you know what, Libby, this was a really weak part of your presentation. We don't hear that as, oh, I'm a terrible professional. We hear that as, okay, this is a development area and I need to do better at XYZ. So take feedback as input. And if we can be unemotional about it, we start to see it as just data points. And so if I go into presentations and I go into 5 presentations and I get massive pushback in every single one, I don't take that as, oh, I'm really bad at my job. I take that as, I need to do more due diligence and I need to change the way that I'm preparing for these presentations before I walk into the room because something in my process right now is not working. So don't take it as a personal reflection. Take it as data. Take it as inputs
Mhm.
that I need to do something different in my process. When we walk in to an executive suite, we've done a lot of work to get there. And so I totally understand getting defensive because it feels like that work is a part of us. And, you don't
Mm,
like my baby and
mm.
you're rejecting me and all that. So I understand it. But the more we can divorce ourselves from that, the more productive the conversation will be.
Yeah. I also think it's important to not acknowledge that despite the level of preparation you may do, it's very possible that questions may come up that you don't know the answer to, or objections may come up that you don't have the ability to overcome on the spot. And in those cases, it's so essential to just be honest.
Yes.
That is a very important consideration. And actually, I have not looked into that. However, what I will do and commit and make sure that you follow through, because that's the other thing, not surprisingly, that executives brought up a lot. If you don't know the answer, do not make it up. You're going to lose credibility very, very quickly if you do.
Yes, we're terrified to say we don't know because we think I don't know means I don't know anything, when in reality, it means I don't know the answer to this question. And I think that you can even turn that moment into an asset of I don't know the answer, but like you said, What I'd love to do is this. I'm gonna go talk to legal, I'm gonna go talk to finance, and I wanna have a conversation about this, and I'd like to get back to you in 48 hours to give you an update on where that is. Not only have you not tried to fake it, which is going to undermine trust in you, but you have showed an action plan and that you are taking the question very seriously and that you have time bounded it as well. I'm going to get back to you in 48 hours. That's a big element of executive presence, of showing I can handle this. I can handle this calmly with grace.
Mhm.
And I'm going to use this moment to try and build trust. So that moment will always come up. There will always be a question that you don't know the answer to. So just know that it's going to happen and know that it's not necessarily a reflection on you, but you can actually use that time as an asset.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about style. We haven't really delved into that very much. Should you change your communication style depending on the person or a group of people that you're trying to influence?
When you said style, I thought mid-century modern. That was my immediate answer. So I took it of the totally wrong way. I stick by mid-century modern,
I'd be
but
very interested in discussing that level of style. We'll have that for
okay,
a separate
that's a different,
podcast.
IKEA boho chic is my secondary answer. The answer is absolutely, because we need to know our audience, and one of the things we need to know about our audience is what's their preferred way of receiving information. I've seen executives who genuinely truly want to have a spreadsheet pulled up in front of them so they can poke around in the spreadsheet. And then there are executives who want one page and one page only. So, yes, we do need to tailor our communication accordingly. The way our audience wants to receive information is a very big ingredient of that. And we can figure that out very quickly. Either we've presented to that audience or we know folks who have presented to that audience, but every audience is going to have a different way that they like to communicate and a different way that they like to receive information. Maybe marketing loves a pre-read and finance wants to go into the financials live. Know that going in, because it's like somebody speaking to you in a language that you don't speak. You're not going to understand it. So we need to speak to our audience in the way that they preferred to be spoken to, and matching our communication style up to their preferred communication style is going to make for a much more productive conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm thinking just in client communication, some clients will be really, really offended if you try to just get to the bottom line
Right.
and get to business. They want to spend
Right.
more time on the social. I want you to
Right.
be asking me how my kids are, my
Right.
latest trip. I don't
Right.
want to get right to business.
Right.
Others get really, really irritated if you spend a lot
Yes.
of time on idle chit chat before getting to business.
Yes,
So
the social
knowing
thing is so interesting, because that's so true in a corporate setting as well. Of some folks wanna spend the first 10 minutes, "How was their weekend? How's your travel? What are you doing?" And, it's so you can see in people's body language and their excitement and engagement whether they want more of that, and they'll say, "Oh, you know what? That's so funny. We went to Wisconsin, and I have the funniest story about that." And some folks, if you're not getting down to business in the first 30 seconds, the sense is, "Why are we wasting time here?" So the social thing is really interesting, and that differs a lot based on company culture. Some are Southwest Airlines was very, we want to focus on the social, we want to focus on relationships first. And so that was something that I had to realize, because I thought, why are we doing this? Why are we showing pictures of our kids in a finance meeting? But you realize it's part of the culture and it's part of the way that people want to communicate, and you have to respect that.
Mhm, mhm, and oftentimes you'll have a mixture, so you try to find
It's
that
true.
delicate balance.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'd be remiss, given the fact that I led with the 10 fastest growing capabilities with a lot of technology skills rising to the surface, if we didn't talk about AI and AI's role in all of this. AI can help us generate content faster than ever. We all know that. As
Yes.
communication becomes easier to produce, what human skills become even more important for influencing?
Man, AI is it's everything right now. AI is in the ether. So AI has made it very easy to produce a ton of information quickly and produce designs very quickly. Claude design is getting better and better, and I actually really like ChatGPT's slides. They're very good. Now, having said that, you can spot an AI generated slide from a mile away. There is a sameness to that communication. What I think folks need to know is that AI has raised the bar and not lowered it, because while you do have all these tools at your disposal, so does everyone else. And think about walking into your CEO's office and she says, I want information about XYZ. You're never going to say, actually, I have a 30-page report that Claude put together for me. So here is that report. She's going to say, absolutely not. I don't have time, because you are ChatGPT for her. You are the person that is supposed to summarize all of this, boil up the most important information to the top, and be able to answer questions on that. I've gotten the question a lot recently of, well, we don't really need presentation training because we have AI. AI is phenomenal at the mechanics of so many aspects of a presentation, helping me do the research, synthesize the research, even slides. But I would never walk into an executive's office and say, here's a report that ChatGPT generated. I would walk in having to know the story, because that's what I'm there for. They have ChatGPT too. They can get the exact same information. What they're paying me for is my brain and my analysis, and they're paying me to go through all that information and then put a recommendation on it and say, based on what I see, based on what I know of you all, based on what I know about our company's priorities, here's what I think that we should do. So I hugely encourage folks to use AI for the things that it does better than we do. Primary research, oh my gosh, there's no going back. It can put together information faster than us, it can synthesize, it can do all those things well, but there's no substitute for a person who was well prepared to talk about a topic, to give a recommendation to a room full of busy executives and be able to answer questions about that. That is something that AI can't and won't replace.
Here, here. Agree
Yes.
100%.
I'm
All
worried it
right.
makes me sound too old school, but
Oh,
I love AI, but we need a human. You need a human to speak
you're
to it.
sounding real.
Thank
Very,
you.
very relevant.
Unrobotic.
All right. So let's leave our audience with a closing thought. If everyone watching could adopt just one communication habit tomorrow that would noticeably increase their influence, what would it be?
Learn to lead with the answer. I would put this on a t-shirt. I might get a tattoo that says lead with the answer, probably on my forehead. If not there, I don't know where. Lead with the answer. There's nothing else that you can do that is so powerful. And it's so good for everybody. It's great for your audience because they know exactly where you're going. It's great for you because it forces you to figure out what the core of your presentation is. It's also great for you because it makes you appear confident, polished, and prepared. It makes you look like a leader who can communicate decisively. So learn to lead with the answer. Oftentimes we bring so much data, so much information, because in our mind, more data means more convincing. And the more data I have, the more you're going to be influenced into my line of thinking. When in reality, we need to do the analysis on what the data says, and we need to communicate that confidently. Learn to lead with the answer. It will transform your communication overnight.
Fantastic. Libby, thank you so much. You have offered
Angie.
such sound advice, and thank you to our audience for your terrific questions. And all to our audience, if you have any topics, especially communication related topics that you're really interested in learning more about, please put them in chat or reach out to me directly. We'd love your input on what's most important to you, given we are an audience centric, focused organization here. And I encourage you all to tune in next month for our next Power Speaking Live event.